2, 1.
Hello all, and welcome to our Agility Leadership Network meetup tonight. I am Captain American Ashley, and alongside marvelous Giles. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Hi, I'm Giles.
We are your co-hosts tonight for James Dewan's amazing presentation to us on continuous improvement, Agile and business agility, bringing the tribes together, where we're calling all Avengers to assemble. So, just a little bit about James. So James has had an unorthodox career over the past 20 years. He's seen systems thinkers operating tribally, sometimes in exclusive cliques around lean, Scrum, quality, business agility, etc. So today he's going to be bringing his unique lens to the topic of business agility and the great opportunity which exists in many organizations to bring systems thinking tribes together. Or as you call it, James, Marvel's Avengers, embracing challenges and opportunities together as purpose-driven network, able to situationally apply the right techniques and thinking, underpinned by common values. So I will go ahead and stop sharing, James. Okay. And before I pass it over to you, I just want to confirm that when we go through the talk tonight, James, would you like people to use the raise hand functionality during, or would you like them to type in? And Giles and I can kind of help prioritize and thread some questions throughout and then have a bulk Q&A at the end?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm quite happy if people want to interrupt me as we go, that feel free. Let's try and make this a conversation if we can. But there will be a Q&A at the end as well. So let's just see how we go. But yeah, I'm pretty relaxed. If you want to say something, please join in.
Great. Thanks, James. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess, is it okay to spotlight myself? Is that okay?
100%. Yep, go for it.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thanks everyone. Really pleased to be here and to share my pretty mad career, which has enabled me to, I guess, as the blurb would suggest, I kind of feel like I've lived in two tribes for the past 15 years. I've been with the Agile folks and the using Scrum and Kanban and all sorts of things. But I've also spent a lot of my career with the lean folks, predominantly applying it in across transactional processes. But it's given me some insights into some things which hopefully towards the end we can see presents us with a big opportunity. Before we set sail, I'm just going to do a quick poll. Let's see which tribes we've got in tonight. So let me just share my screen and we'll do a quick Menti poll and see who we've got. So if you could go to menti.com, please, and enter this code 19258612, and just let me know so far, what do you know about Lean and/or Six Sigma?
Oh, good job that works, James.
Say again, is it working okay?
I said, good job that works.
Okay, here we go. Okay, very cool. So this helps me a lot because now I know there's a couple of people or a few people who've got an awareness. Some people are kind of using this stuff in the trenches, and I don't know, for completeness, I better do this for Agile too. So let's so we can see we've got a bunch of teachers in, so I have to be careful. Not it makes me a bit nervous. But let's just do the same thing for Agile. So let's just check what Agile experience we got in the house. Make no assumptions. Different code this time, 60753592. What's your Agile experience? Someone's gone.
Very good.
Okay, that's great. So very good. That's a very nice mix of people. Actually, we've got unexpectedly at the Agile Leadership Network, we've got a lot of people who consider themselves mentors or coaches at Agile, and probably much heavier Agile experience within the room. But that helps me because I now kind of know how to pitch this and who I'm talking to. Okay, so let's dive in. So in terms of what I'm going to go through, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my career, give you a bit of a background to the life I led, and then we'll get in a little bit into some of the things which, over the courses of my career, some of my observations. I do want to stress, though, these are my observations, right? So I'm not claiming to have done some big academic study. And if you're seeing something different, or you disagree with what I'm saying, I'd really love to hear that too. I'm not trying to present this as some empirical truth, but just observation of some of the things that I've seen and some of the things we're seeing in Catalyst. Okay, so first of all, my story, right? It started out proudly graduating from the University of Wales in Latin, and then the crestfallen moment where I realized Latin really paid really badly. So I then for some reason, reached into some of my hobbies. I first of all tried to make it as a musician. That didn't pay very well either. And then I'd always been into software engineering. I'd always been into sort of writing software from the days of my BBC Micro. So I then decided I was going to have a go and see if I could make writing software my career. And my goodness, did they manage to make my hobby an absolute pain and horror show, right? So I'm old enough to remember the pre-Agile days. And yeah, it was something that was, it should have been a joy to go to work every day. People are paying me to do my hobby, and it is just horrible, right? Constant disappointment, long hours, constantly disappointing everyone. We're just late. And yeah, so this big dream, and you can see on my t-shirt, the Millennium Bug, that gives you some idea about when this was and how old I am. But yeah, very disappointing experience. And then my life got better. And yeah, don't worry, I didn't become an alcoholic. Basically, the company I was with started to get into this new thing called Agile. I kind of hated it to start with, to be honest. I thought it was the worst thing I'd ever heard of, that we were all going to dive in and start coding. And then I kind of got into it. Life's always better with beer. Fully agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. But I had a bit of an allergic reaction to start with, didn't like it. And then started to slowly, surely, things started to get better in my life. I started to get my weekends back. I started to go home at 5 o'clock. And very cool things were starting to happen. The product managers were stopping to shouting at us, and the customers were really liking it. And what was even better was things like we're at tonight. I went to this thing called XP Tuesdays in Nottingham, where I lived, and we just meet up in the pub and share ideas, and very exciting time to be alive. And by the way, my hobby now, it felt like my hobby at work. I was having fun at work, and it felt like having fun with my mates, and cool things were happening. But I don't need to tell you guys this, because you're all Agilists. Fast forward then, 2005, I joined a company that makes coding and marking solutions. So like your best before end dates, barcodes on goods. Help them they similar kind of wretched story developing PC software. Help them to kind of turn the story around. And then the senior leaders heard about me, this rather weird guy in R&D who'd helped the software guys do something cool. And they said, would you like to come and learn about this thing called Lean? And so I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. But then things took a wrong turn, because they started talking to me about processes. So I'm just going to quickly check, and maybe we'll see how we go with the poll. Let's just see now, straw poll, when you guys think of processes, what does it conjure in your mind? And I don't mean what's the technical definition of a process. I mean, when you hear the word process, what does it conjure in your mind? So 2251-8433, let's just see what we got. We'll do a word cloud and see what we've got. Jeremy, your eye is twitching. Are you okay? Okay, so we've got mapping, terror, repeatable, nightmare, insanity, linear, value and non-value add. Is that you, MH? Rigid, yeah, right. So so this word rigid in the middle, that's kind of how I felt about process, right? So when the lean people started talking to me, I wanted to run for the hills because I was like, oh my God, I've just got away from this insanity. I don't want more of this. And my idea of a process was basically like a straitjacket. You know, someone came and told me off and told me to do things in a really stupid way. And somebody didn't know how to do my job as well as I did, came and told me off and told me to do things in a stupid way. And then the person, the lean, oh, there's more coming in, hang on. Yeah, so we've got consistency, bloated, swim lanes, yeah, value, great. Okay, so I didn't have these positive vibes about processes. In actual fact, I wanted to run for the hills. And I saw it like this picture here, loads of paper and awful things going on. And then the lean person who was teaching me, thankfully took me to one side and said, you got a really bad idea of process, right? This is not what we mean in lean. He said, a process is our shared understanding of the current best way of doing something. And he said, in a lean company, everyone's got two jobs. Rule number one, follow the shared understanding of the current best way. Not because someone forces you to, but because we want to. What kind of idiot wouldn't follow a recipe proven to give good results? Job number two is find a better way. And I don't want to like overplay this, but that was a life-changing moment for me. I'm really creative, and suddenly I really unlocked something in me. I was like, this sounds really cool. Do tell me more, right? So then I started learning about lean and how it's all about kind of removing waste and making flow happen and doing things like value stream maps so that we can put facts and data around what's going on, and we can look for this guy Tim Woods who's screwing everything up and causing all this waste, and his pet wombat that's really screwing things up, right? The waste of money, brains, and time. And I started learning about things like the theory of constraints, the insanity of human beings, how we assume any improvement to any part of the system is going to make it better. But it turns out, actually, if you work on bits that aren't the constraint, you can make the system worse, no matter how well-meaning you are. And I learned about things like cells and how the lean folks were saying, let's get a small cross-functional team together, working in the same area to get things done. And they started talking to me about things like improvement kata, and how we do things around here is we have lots of transparency, we have lots of autonomy, we have these kind of daily rituals that we do to try and make sure everything goes really well. We make problems visible with visual management, and we review problems on a daily basis, and we not only that, we're so into this that every day leaders are like practicing getting better and better at leadership. And getting better and better at making the people in the process, enabling them. And I was thinking, wow, this is feeling really familiar, right? I'm starting to see this massive crossover. If I did the Venn diagram of what the Agile folks were doing and what the lean people were doing, very, very similar, except it felt like they were inhabiting different universes. These guys never spoke to each other. It's like, this is something that happens in IT, the Agile people, and then leans for the rest of the company, right? Except the philosophy behind this stuff seemed to be exactly the same. It was all about mindset and values, the growth mindset, and problems or opportunities to solve, and really kind of building organizations where we care about each other, we look after each other, we try and make sure that we're hot on processes, not people. Anyway, it turned out all this stuff, learning about this stuff was great for my career, right? So I then started taking leadership positions. So head of software globally. I became a program manager, so I got to play around with Scrum and building printers and using what I knew with Agile. And then I kind of got my dream job, right? I was made head of strategy deployment, using something called Hoshin Camry, and really getting to take everything I knew about lean, everything I knew about Agile, and to work with the board of $1 billion company to really try and get things moving. So if you haven't come across this before, Hoshin Kanri means management of direction. And it's really a kind of a way of aligning the whole organization in quite an autonomous fashion. First of all, the big dream. What are we trying to do around here? What's the big dream that we're trying to achieve? And kind of project out a little bit. In 5 years' time, if we were on track for that, what would it look like? What are the measurable things that would be different? And to then figure out, well, if we were going to be on track for that, what would the end of this year need to look like? And what would need to change around here? And you then play this game called catch ball, where you don't tell everyone what to do. You throw the ball and you ask. You say, embark everybody. How do you think you can contribute? Well, we need to get more effective in sales. What would that look like? What changes would we need to make? How would we measure it? You will not believe how much I was laughing the first time the Agilist started talking about OKRs. And I looked at it, I was like, blimey, that's kind of what we were doing. That's Hoshin Kanri. That's you've kind of put another label on something that already existed. So this was an incredibly fun job, but also starting to see insights into the boardroom and the weird stuff that goes on, and how, getting onto the Avengers in a bit, how we got this weird thing going on in boardrooms where we solve puzzles in the boardroom, and we decide who the best tribe is out of these problem-solving tribes we've got. Is it R&D? Do we give it to them, or do we give it to the process improvement people or the supply chain team? And everybody, even in this wonderful Hoshin Kanri system, is kind of in a silo, in their own lane. And hilariously, people like the Agile people and the continuous improvement people not talking together, even though they're working on the same business system, right? And then 2017, I joined Catalyst. I've got, I believe, one of the best jobs in the world. Get to now use what I know to help coach. I'm working with Neil and some of my other colleagues in Catalyst. We get to work with organizations to help bring some of this thinking into their organization. I've kind of become a bit of hence the photo, teaching old dogs new tricks. That's what I seem to be somehow specializing in. And what we're seeing, and what I've seen, is that organization I worked in doesn't seem to be a special case. There seems to be lots of cool things going on in lots of organizations, but there seems to be also an awful lot of crazy going on as well, right? and we'll talk about that. So what have I learned through all of this stuff? Well, first of all, and hopefully I won't offend anyone in saying this, but I figured out it's kind of all the same stuff when you squint at it, right? All of these tribes, they've got their names for these different things. You know, some call it design thinking. Some folks call it Scrum. Some folks call it Kanban. Some call it Lean. Some call it Lean Six Sigma, or at the other end of the scale, some call it Lean Startup. What we've got going on here is basically business systems and science, right? Whatever we're doing, we're basically aiming to make a change to some kind of business system, and we're measuring it, and we're trying to get more of the kind of effects that we like. We're trying to get less of the effects that we don't want to see. So let me just check. Am I offending anyone with this assertion? It seems bonkers to me that you've got all these people, and I don't want to bash them, especially as I'm at an ALN event. I see this really strongly in organizations like Scrum Alliance, where they're like so pigeonholed in their own space and not seeing what's going on around them. And yeah, it seems like a shame. It seems like we get narrow in what we're doing.
You've not had any negative comments in the chat, James.
Okay,
And
thanks
when you asked the question, when you asked if people were offended, there were lots of people shaking their heads saying no.
Thanks, Charles. Much appreciated. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, it's all kind of the same stuff, sort of, and culture is everything, right? So, you know, you get these things like culture eats strategy for breakfast, but thank God people like Dan Pink have come along, and we're starting to see the evidence from the psychologists. We got people like David Rock coming along, explaining what the neuroscientists are telling us. Used to be someone like me, right, in the boardroom, it was like, who is invited, this hippie, this guy isn't a real business person. He seems to want to give the world a hug. Talking about work being fun and all this stuff. Well, all of these tribes, to my mind, seem to have this in common, that they seem to understand we need to behave differently. And also the medical science seems to be behind us. If we're wanting to build these organizations who can do cool things and can apply PDCA across the business system, we have to get our behaviors right. We have to get our environment right. And the Venn diagram of what I've seen from the Lean tribe and what I've seen from the Agile tribe just like totally overlaps, right? It's the same stuff. And it's the same stuff Toyota figured out in the 70 years ago. It's not new, but absolutely essential. The other thing that seems to be ubiquitous around this stuff is the idea of vision and purpose. Again, because of what the psychologists are telling us, but also because actually we need to know where we're going. If we want people to self-organize, if we want to be good systems thinkers, we need to have some idea of where we're going. And to use my colleague Chris Merriman's expression, light the fire in people, right? If we're going to be moving forward with the big dream. And we need to get good at systems thinking, right? So the bonkers things, conversations that we get involved in Catalyst, especially when we get into the upper echelons of organizations, you wouldn't believe they were all working mostly on the same business model, right? The partitioned way that the thinking goes. And the R&D folks are in this value proposition bit. They're often not really thinking about the customers and who they serve, just getting the stuff out on time. And then you've got the lean people, supply chain people, all in this key activity stuff, like it's in its own bubble, right? Its own system. It's not part of this business system that we're trying to do. And really just what's becoming really apparent is we need to help with this stuff, right? We need to help the people in the boardroom understand, even if they're using the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard, it's all one system, learning and growth, processes, what the outcomes we're trying to create for our customers. And what does that all mean in terms of the financial measures? Except that's not where the madness ends, right? With the silos, because you then start to see so many organizations making their decisions here, right? With the financial measures. They're the outputs of the system. They're not the you shouldn't use those for decisions. You're going to end up in a race to the bottom. You're going to go down the plug hole, right? It's going to be about reducing costs, and it's going to be about how do we get more sales, not looking at the things that we control down here, right? The processes and the people and the products and the services. And really that's what it seems to boil down to, right? And I might be oversimplifying, but it's mission, why do we exist today? Vision, where are we trying to get to? And this messy stuff in the middle, which is the what next, right? And what is it that we need to apply? And this is where we get into the Avengers, right? Because this is where we get into the nutty things that are going on. We're making these decisions in many organizations. Go on, Giles.
Just waving by to Jeremy because he was leaving. So
okay, no problem. Yeah, so this is where we get into the Avengers, right? So you end up with the Hulk, right? Design thinking people. We go and give the work to them because we decide the next change will suit them. It's to do with a brand new service, say, and we need to design it from scratch. We got Thor. He's the Lean Six Sigma tribe, right? So Thor's having a wonderful time optimizing processes, right? And applying lean thinking and getting flow to happen and getting waste to happen out of the processes. And we got Iron Man. Iron Man mostly lives in IT, right? And Iron Man does Scrum and Kanban, right? Even though this, as Neil and I were telling people all the time, aren't we? This stuff isn't just for IT. For some reason, in most companies, Iron Man lives in IT and he's not allowed out of IT. That's his comic, right? And then we've got quality management. They're a very unusual tribe. So Captain America is doing loads of systems thinking and improvement, but they don't realize they're doing it because they kind of do it with their special power is auditing and non-conformance, right? And recommendations, but still systems thinkers, right? And then we've got these new kids on the block, these analytical folks who will just go and mine data for you and help you to make all these data-driven decisions. Except that doesn't make any sense. We need the Avengers. We're dealing with one business system. We're not dealing with, I mean, I don't want to, I know in many businesses, you might have more than one business model. I don't want to make it sound like every organization has one canvas. But my goodness, when we're contemplating change, when we're wanting to get towards the vision, who's to say which kind of problem that we're dealing with? And I tell you what, the VPs and the directors, they, in my experience, are definitely not the ones to figure this out, right? Their perspective is not one to be able to systems think their way out of it and think what we're dealing with. Go on, Ash.
James, who do you think should be doing this? Who's
good question? It's coming
up.
it's coming up, but I do think the leaders should be doing it. Ash is the truth. But I think what we're needing is a new type of organization and a new type of leader. That's why I use this idea of the Avengers, because I think what we've got here is a movement. And it's a movement. I love it, by the way. Oh my goodness, I love the mask. So what's going on? Well, first of all, Ash, in answer to your question, we need to understand what we're dealing with. I know there are like lots of different models out there that you can use. I'm a big fan of Cynefin, right? So if you've not seen this before, this is the Cynefin framework. But I imagine as a lot of your Agile coaches, you definitely would have seen Cynefin. I have to admit, Cynefin, a bit like the business model canvas, passed me by when I first saw it. I didn't really understand what a big deal it was. But what you generally find is, first of all, when we're contemplating change, we need to understand what we're dealing with, right? Are we dealing with simple and complicated problems? Lean Six Sigma is awesome for that, right? It will, for a bound system, there are things in Lean, patterns for those of you who are software folks, we can apply to fix things. We don't need to, sometimes life gets more difficult. We need things like Six Sigma, which will help us to get to the root cause of problems. Awesome for optimizing our system. Awesome for taking waste out, getting flow to happen. Then we got this stuff in the top left, the complex stuff, the stuff where, you know, you're going to get into analysis paralysis. If you start trying to understand the system, you start trying to get to root causes, you need to make changes to the system and observe in order to be able to understand what you're dealing with, to make small change, to measure, to amplify the things we like, to dampen down the things we don't like, right? And as you guys all know, often the problems will find their way around this, from chaos, where our house is on fire, to complex, we're getting to understand, to complicated, we're now starting to understand it's a bit more, the wiring's a bit clearer than we thought, right through to sometimes simple. Problem being though, and this is where you were going, Ash, whose job is it? Most of our boardrooms, I think, are in this middle box, right? Disorder. I don't think they know what they're dealing with half the time. And so they just make a decision, right? They treat the puzzle like they're in this chaos zone down here, right? And they just take some action. I mean, I don't know how many of you are involved in this kind of stuff, but I sit in meetings where the answer always seems to be, we need to reorganize the organization, right? Organizational redesign has to be the answer. Well, there's a reason for that. It's the one bloody lever that's in their hands, right? That they can do something about. So they want to pull that lever, versus really what we need to do is to all the things we've learned over the last 20 years, self-organize, start to be able to light the way, but start to be able to understand what it is we're dealing with. And to my mind, that's why I got so excited, and Neil will tell you this, when we started to see the business agility stuff take hold, because I think this might be the glue that brings these tribes together, right? I think we're seeing the rise of a new type of organization, an organization whose senior leadership behave in a different way, where we're much more about vision and purpose, And we're actually starting to empower and ask people rather than tell them what to do. And certainly getting away from the idea of we just need to clear the decks and reorganize ourselves every 5 minutes. That's clearly the answer to all of our puzzles. And really, I'm a big fan of these guys, the corporate rebels. I think they've nailed it, to be honest, in the observations they've made and the trends they've seen in terms of. So why don't I think Agile would work in chaotic? I absolutely think it would work for chaotic. I must admit, I pinched that slide from something I was dealing with, where I was describing to people the difference between complicated and complexity. But yeah, I'll fully take that. I 100% think you can use Agile if you're in a chaotic environment. More in my metaphor, where that slide was stolen from, I was thinking more like our house is on fire, and it's the time where we do need directive, do this leadership. So I was almost placating the audience I had, if you can forgive me, because I was helping them to see that sometimes that dictatorial do this way of behaving has a place, that it's not the case that we never do it, but it's the case that most of our puzzles these days aren't in those boxes. Most of our puzzles actually are in complex and complicated. So yes, can I be forgiven for that? It was playing to the audience that I clearly don't have today. Is that okay? Yes. So we're seeing the rise of this new kind of organization, and what we're seeing is the rise of a new kind of professional, actually. And this is where, hence the notion of the Avenger, that actually it's not about being pigeonholed into your specialism anymore. Same stuff we know in the Scrum teams, right? About being T-shaped. It's these new, more multi-talented people, but more talented leaders, right? They're able to apply the thinking, and they're able to diagnose and pattern sense what we're dealing with. And they're able to engender these new kinds of organization. You know, working with a client at the moment who's also co-working with the Rebels and part of the Rebels Academy, but not necessarily trying to copy these cool companies, but being able to copy some of the thinking that's making it work. And to be able to get towards these new kind of organizations that can, that can adapt, but can situationally apply the thinking, that we get out of our pigeonholes, out of our lanes, and to be honest, some way out of our, sort of intellectual tribes, where we start talking to each other, we start talking to the other tribes, and we start to be able to collaborate. So back to your question, Ash. So you asked me, who should be doing this, right? I'm coming to the conclusion it's us. Yeah, we're the leaders. You know, if we're not the leaders today, we're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And I'm seeing it in so many organizations that we're working with, that some of the existing leadership don't get it, and they maybe never will. But the next generation is very much becoming this new kind of professional. And I guess the challenge of the Avengers is let's see if we can fast track that. Let's see if we can start to scoop up these systems thinkers and get them collaborating, get more of things like this group today, having more and more lean people, more and more people are coming from the quality background, and see if we can start to get some sanity happening in our organizations. Okay, and that's it. That's my pitch for becoming an Avenger. Over to the Q&A.
Can I just add on to your last point there, that it's us? I mean, I was working for 10 months with an organization that leadership just didn't get it right. And it took 10 months of working in the weeds with people. And then when the teams and, you know, the doers and the middle layer, when we were enacting and enabling the change and the turnabout for the outcomes, just like you have here on the slide, then literally after 10 months, the senior leadership came to me and said, we get it now. We're bought into this. But they had to see it first. They have to see the outcomes, and then they'll sponsor it, you know. And
actually, I've got exactly the same. I joined a regional council trying to do something different in social care. they'd gone through 7 years of reorganization. The people were change fatigued beyond anything I'd ever seen before. The people that were left just weren't interested in anything else coming along. And I did something new. When I told the leadership about the approach, that it was agile, they threw their toys out the pram. They basically said, no, we failed. No agile project delivered anything. So you're definitely not using that in social care. You know,
Yes.
we'll be dragged in front of MPs and in front of the paper and everything. So I just called it an adaptive approach, and launched a new service in 3 months. Then they went, how on earth did you do that? We never launch anything in less than a year. And I said, I used Agile. They just couldn't believe it. But then they started to realize that they've been doing things wrong. It was the whole leadership structure and not supporting what they were trying to do. I took those out of the equation because I had the power to be able to do it or the influence to do it myself.
What I'm definitely saying is that I talk about business agility being the glue, but I do think that's part of the pull. It's like, it seems to be, I mean, whether it is business agility or systems thinking, it does seem to be an umbrella, and it's got a bit of cred at the moment. It's cool. People do want to know about it. And it does seem to be something that can unite the tribes. Everyone can get their head around what it means and what it could do for us.
We don't have a question in the chat, but James, there is a comment from Aaron that might be worth exploring a little bit further together, where he says, and Aaron, feel free to come off mute and come on camera if you want to elaborate a bit further, but he said he thinks there's a difference in application of business agility in non-regulated industries versus heavily regulated industries. And I think we can probably extrapolate that to the difference between all different types of industries and sectors as well. So Aaron, did you want to share any more about that before maybe James?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when you're in a extremely heavily regulated sector versus a very lightly regulated sector, your range of motion and the governors around that are incredibly limited. And you can sort of have what I like to say are like micro tactical agility wins, and those are good, and they're almost sort of proof of value to try to build, you know, sort of a subculture, almost a guerrilla culture that could support it. But trying to sort of implement large swaths of agility is structurally impossible because of the regulatory environment that the most heavily regulated industries or the public.
Aaron, do you mind if I ask which industries do you have in mind?
Well, so healthcare, medical device, manufacturing, anything associated with safety and aerospace. So, you know, when you're in these sort of extremely, they've been engineered at a heuristic level, and they've been, in essence, co-developed in, you know, around a safety or precautionary principle, regardless of the efficacy. I mean, there actually often isn't any efficacy. It defaults to the precautionary, and then the insurance defaults to that, because you have to have business insurance at that scale and the bonding associated with it, and it's pretty global. I mean, you're not going to release a new medical device in any you know, highly regulated medical device or health system in the world and not have that company bonded by at least $1 billion, and then have the reinsurance companies bonding those insurance companies and so on, right? So, I mean, you wind up being so instrumented, I guess is my whole point.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my own philosophy on this, Aaron, and I work with lots of regulated organizations, financial services and medical and pharma. Some of it comes down to mindset, in my experience, right, when it comes to regulation, because we are pretty awesome, actually, whether we call ourselves the lean tribe, whether we call ourselves the agile tribe, whatever we want to call ourselves, there's one person at the heart of everything that we do, and it's the customer, right? And the one thing that we'll never, ever sacrifice in our pursuit of getting value into their hands as soon as we can is quality, right? And what is the regulator there for? Well, they're generally there for the same things, and we're generally on the same side. What tends to happen though is, and it's partly to do with the kind of the, not necessarily Avengers partitioning, but siloed partitioning. As organizations grow, they grow silos, and they lose the ability to have sensible conversations, and they lose the ability to think sensibly. And what tends to happen, in my experience, where I've been helping people with business agility in this space, if you talk to the regulator, explain what you're trying to do, and explain to them all the things you're doing to make sure that quality is high, that we've got safety, that everything's built in. You know, the philosophy of lean is we don't test for quality, we build it into our products. The conversation can change and has changed. So I'm fully with you, but I do think a lot of the time it tends to be a fixed mindset within organizations, and they create their own prisons. And it's not always coming from the regulator. And the regulators, you can have surprisingly human conversations with them. You know, one of my top clients is the London Stock Exchange. We've gone and had conversations with the regulator, because they've got to change as well, right? Some of the ways that they're regulating is 100 years old. And yeah, it's basically, I think you're right. I think it is a constraint, but it's a constraint that can sometimes, all too often, I think, get us into a fixed mindset, something that we feel is immutable, and it's just not my experience. And has anybody else got experience of it?
I'm the same, James. So I've worked in the finance sector and in healthcare and social care, and working with the regulators to work in a different way. They actually realized that they were going to see higher quality and faster, because it was going to be part of the system as opposed to something that needs to be audited on at some point. They were like in the social care example I gave earlier. We'd been working on a solution. The historical solution could take months to actually deliver, but having something built incrementally, you're getting the quality built in. And so the regulator was really happy with that, because they actually saw quality outcomes quicker for the person that was consuming the service.
We got a nice comment just coming from Richard, I can see as well. So Richard, you just want to expand on that? I'll read it then, Richard. So Richard saying his last role as a Scrum Master was at the Financial Conduct Authority. The FCA themselves are using Agile and promoting it. So the world's changing. It's, I personally think it's an exciting time to be alive. We're figuring out better and better ways of doing things. And I think regulators are part of that story. I was once audited by a pharma regulator. I was told for our Scrum process, we needed to change everything. We need to start creating this documentation. When the auditor came up, they said it's one of the best processes they'd ever seen, because we could just pinpoint the change, the motivation behind the change, the tests that showed that that was working, the data had gone into the code, when it had been deployed, and we had such powerful process control. But if I'd listened to the quality department, I'd have had to change the whole process into a waterfall process to satisfy what they needed. So we've got another question coming in. So what tip?
Well, James, we've actually got a few people with their hands up now.
Okay, sorry.
So that's fine. We've got Marcos and Mao and Richard, who are here. So first up is Marcos. So over to you, sir.
So I worked 18 years with a heavily regulated industry with airlines, and with pilot records and qualifications to ensure that they are compliant and they are up to speed. And it's very tight, very rigid, but what you said is true, is the mindset. I personally worked with the FAA agents, and once they saw how the system works and how they do their part by testing and confirming or giving feedback, they were fine with it. That's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. It's not, there are those within the company themselves would say, no, I cannot trust this. And so, but look, this is how it works. Let's work through it and let's test it. And then eventually they go, oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're doing. Okay, that's fine. So there is the mindset, which is the closed mindset that is there, very rigid. And then there is the process, which they are, if you look at the system, they are the constraints of the system. You must perform this way. You must do 5 million transactions safely and securely, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing. Is they just have to understand how the process and what you're doing respects their constraints. So basically, that's it.
Thank you very much. Mao, do you want to jump in, sir?
Sure thing. Sure thing. Thank you very much, good gentlemen. First of all, James, thank you very much for all the presentation. I absolutely loved it. I just got a couple of more examples. I work in one of the most regulated industries here in Mexico, is the financial and banking, and we have not one or two, but like 3 regulations apart from our own regulations. And this creates a lot of things. I won't get into a lot of examples, but one thing that is more like a mindset is to be pragmatic, because a lot of times they would tell us, oh, you cannot do this because it's in the process, or you cannot do this because the regulator wouldn't say. And what I would say is just challenge that, go back and tell, okay, show me the process. And from our experiences, like 80% of the times, the process or the regulation does not say what the other people say. So just to challenge this thing and be mindful of, okay, I believe in your process, I believe in the regulation, but let's just check and let's see where our guidelines are. This is very, very powerful. And this is another thing for the Agile mindset. And just to ask a question and not just say a comment is, James, one question. I would consider myself an Agilist first and foremost, because as you said, there's more than one flavor of Agile, and you need to do a lot of things. But what would you say to the people that they have a hammer and they want to see everything as a nail? Yeah. So, or they think that there's a silver bullet out there, and they think not only the traditional way, but also the Scrum Masters, and want to use Scrum in every way, or want to scale in one framework in specific. What would you say to those people that don't want to challenge their assumptions, or think that there's more than one way to do this, and to be more T-shaped, as you said?
Yeah, right. And this is where, I mean, I think this is where the whole Avenger thing comes in, because this is, and when I talk about business agility being the glue, I think this is our lever, at least for now, while business agility is cool, because it enables us to be able to start to ask the right questions. Start with the business model canvas. What does it look like right now? What changes are we contemplating, and what are we expecting to happen? What do we assume, and what do we know, and what experiments might we need to run? But I think from there now, we can start to, that's when we're into Connavin, and we can start to understand what are we dealing with. You know, as much as the Scrum people think Scrum's for everything, and by the way, I love Scrum, don't take it, I don't like Scrum, but actually for certain types of problems, it's not the right approach, right? So, and this is about then a dialogue between the Avengers to understand what we're dealing with, and what is the right approach in that situation. And this is the lovely thing about business agility. We can do things by successive approximation, and it might not be, it might be actually, we just need to go and figure out the root cause of why our product isn't selling at the moment. Scrum guys, we don't need you to touch the value proposition, right? Let's at least get to the root cause and figure out what's wrong before we start deciding that we're going to go and make wholesale changes. So, I mean, of all of the methodologies, I would say if they try and use Scrum and everything, they're probably going to do quite well, right? It's a pretty versatile framework, but I do think it's the higher level conversation. It's the macro systems thinking conversation, which will hopefully start to drive those conversations and help us to consider what are our options, and what's the best approach, and what are we going to try. That's basically it.
Does anyone else have any questions they would like to come along and ask? I know, Kai, you had a question in the chat. Is there anyone else who would like to raise anything to our amazing speaker today?
Should I read out Kai's?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Let's share that and see whether James, what James's input for this is.
Kai's question to everyone is, well, and to James, to you, James, really. What tips would you have for companies that are resistant to Agile, especially leaders? Like one of the members that spoke, after months and months, they finally get it, but still are pushing back when they feel they're losing control of their traditional methods. Something I think all of us can relate to.
Yeah. So first of all, stop trying to convince them to be Agile. But what does it? Why would they want to be Agile? That's going to make no sense at all from their perspective. What are they trying to do? What's the big dream? Or what the big dream? What's the big vision that they're trying to make happen? And start to ask questions. Okay, and how is that bit going? Okay, imagine a world where that didn't happen. But I think it's, you know, these senior folks are people too, right? And they're going to go through change curves. They're going to resist. And we haven't got a very compelling story at the minute, by the way. Hand us the keys, right? Surrender it. Surrender all of your authority to us. Trust us. We know what we're doing, right? And then they're the people who are going to have to go back to the shareholders and go to the quarterly meetings if these ideas all tank and it turns out to be a terrible idea. So first of all, I would stop trying to convince people to be Agile and talk to them about what do they want, and then talk to them about how these different techniques might be able to help them. But the other thing to remember is with all of this stuff is they are people as well, and they're going to go through change curves. And yeah, I think sometimes we can be so excitable, I certainly can, that I forget how change curves work. And it's like, yes, stop hammering at them, right? Just chill out a little bit, have a business conversation, talk to them about the business model canvas and recontext what they're trying to do. I've done this a few times with organizations, get the business canvas on the wall, business model canvas on the wall, get them to a current state, right, with different colored Post-its, show me what you'd like this to look like, right? What's the gap? What's your evidence for this? What do you know to be true? What do you believe to be true? They don't know I'm doing business agility, and frankly, it doesn't matter. We can have that conversation later. But yeah, that would be especially with exec teams, unless they have got the Agile bug and they're calling everything Agile. Don't go there. Don't talk about it. Just talk about them being techniques to help change happen.
Sorry, can I just add?
Sure, go for it.
Please, Kai.
Yeah, so that basically means I need to change my whole approach, because I come in as a consultant and I basically come in to say, right, we're here to deliver this project, we're here to implement Agile, and what I take over is pretty much, I think from the presentation, it's Agile everywhere. And then it goes on and on and on. And the first time that I did that, to be fair, I had a few faces looking at me like, what is Agile? Look, what is she talking about? And I did end up having to change the wording and change the words and the language I was using. And I noticed I was getting a different response. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of find out how to sort of tackle that. Because for me, my frustration is I'm getting excited.
Yeah.
And the months and months we're losing.
Yeah.
Get to the point and I'm like, we could have been here 6 months ago.
If they brought you in and asked you to help them become Agile,
yeah,
a different conversation, but the same premise still exists. It's like, why do you want this? What are you trying to make happen? What problems have you got? And if they've just hooked onto the buzzword, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to spend your time kind of talking in strange language to them. So yeah, I think the same premise exists, but it is different if they've asked you to come in and help them with an Agile transformation.
James, don't you find also that when you're asked to come in for such an exciting project, that not everybody's in the same place? That there's a couple of people who go, yeah, I want this, but then there's all of these other peoples that are not on board.
I've got a nasty habit at the minute, Kai, of creating 2-speed transformations as well, which I'm trying to correct, where the coal face goes really fast and the leaders get left behind a little bit. I'm really trying to get better at that, because it's not fair. They're the people who we asked to absorb the most amount of change, and they're often the people who give the least amount of help, right?
Yeah.
like a runaway train. You teach people Scrum, they're not going to give you their freedom back anytime soon, are they? It's a much better world.
I think that's been the problem, though, for at least the last 20 years, right? Since the entire sort of mindset and manifesto, came about. Now, it was designed purposefully to piss off senior management and leadership by bringing in these things to deliver things sort of, sooner, safer, and happier in a way which was trying to balk against the world of waterfall, V model, and other things. And as a software engineer myself, an ex-CTO, exactly the world I used to live and breathe in. The leadership teams were left behind on that journey, and the exposure and experience that they had was poor Agile being done. So of course, then they got rid of it. And the challenge is now a lot of these leaders today are actually the ones kind of going, no, we don't want Agile, right? We want something else. And so what's great is hearing from all the conversation with everybody here today is that we've got to change the vocabulary. We've got to also make sure everybody gets brought on that journey. Yeah, James, you can't have your two-tiering speed, high res, low res speed approach, but obviously. But we've got to change the vernacular so that people can obviously, those who've experienced bad Agile or think they have, actually it's about what outcomes are we wanting to achieve? What's the business improvement and all the things, the amazing things you've been sharing with us today is exactly the right way we need to be changing the conversation when talking to the leadership teams. So thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, very welcome, very welcome. And it's I think it's fine to behave like a bunch of terrorists when the terrorists win, right? But not actually if you're wanting to build a sustainable business and the terrorists don't win. That's going to create a very painful experience. So either we have to take over wholesale or we have to bring them with us. And I reckon most of the time we've got to bring them with us. We don't have the luxury of the terrorists blowing up the whole company and taking over. I know. What's your experience? Are the terrorists winning at the moment, or are we? No, Marcus is saying no.
So to your point and Agile's point, actually, both of you touched on something that we as Agilists live outside. We believe in the systems and the method and the processes, and we have experiments that prove that we are correct. But you go to a big corporation, and which you both touched on this point, you have people who have been there forever. They built that company and their reputation on their belief system. So they were right until now, and these upstarts are coming in and say, no, you have to do things differently. Yeah. So now, then this is one layer. On the top layer, you have a new CEO, a new CIO says, oh yes, we want to do that. So of course, they are all compliant and they are all for it, all gung-ho on it, and they will do it just to appease and please the new boss they have. Yeah. And I'm giving you real scenarios here. Right. So and everybody goes along and plays along, but that's just it. They play along. They do not believe in it. They are not changing their mindset. And as soon as there is a breach on the wall, something goes wrong somewhere, they are not on the fail fast and recover.
Yeah, by the way,
when they see the failure is the opportunity I was waiting for to say this is wrong for us.
And Marcus, that's one area where I think the lean tribe, we got something to learn from, because you do find organizations where the CEO is a lean sensei, right? You do find organizations where they live and breathe it through across the whole company, where the Toyota way of the sensei, the teacher. All leaders are teachers. For MH, you came from GE. They were the same with Six Sigma. Everybody lives and breathes it, right? It's part of the DNA of the organization. So yeah, maybe in terms of our Avengers, we got a bit of humility here as well, because there's something they're doing better than us, in my view.
But we also have those anti-heroes as well. Those CEOs who sort of now they sit at the CEO table by some sort of right, as if they've done it through deserve, or they've been interviewed, or they've done it through progression. They've been at the company 10 years, and now they're sat there. They're the ones, unfortunately, that actually need to be thinking they need to change. A bit of a growth mindset, please. Now that they sit there, they can't come along and actually run the organization with all the things that they've been through, the pains and whatever, and then suddenly go, you know what, I'm going to treat everybody in the same way I've just been treated for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And that is obviously abject failure. So, you know, we do get those anti-heroes in this, and those people don't have those lean skills or those agile skills, or have been through some change process and some change fatigue in their career as well, and kind of ruling it out. No, we don't want this, and we don't want that, and we don't want the other. Well, what do you want? I don't know. I'm the CEO. You go work it out. You know, those are the typical anti-heroes that we end up having. And believe you me, I've worked with more of those CEOs in my 26, 27 year career than the decent ones.
I'll just add to that, Giles, that when the Agile Manifesto came out in 2001, I'd been working in an Agile environment for the previous nearly 10 years. And at that same time, I actually read this book called The Change Activist. Okay, make big things happen fast. I read that in conjunction with what the Agile Manifesto, and I went, do you know what we're trying to do in software? We're just going to fail at some point. And this was trying to get it outside. This book inspired me to get it outside into other parts of the organization, because that was the only way we were going to get the stuff that we were doing in software out there and working rapidly. It's a 2001 book. I don't know if you can still get it anymore, but it's well worth it. I often dip into it today.
About what the Avengers are all about, actually. It's about grown-up Agile. We've got to stop acting like petulant teenagers, right? It's about actually being part of the exec team, not shouting at them.
Yeah.
Right, so I think we've got a couple more questions lined up. I see, Aaron, you've got your hand up. And Natalie, I'm not sure if you're still with us. You had a question in the chat as well that I think we might have half answered by now, actually. But Aaron, do you want to go first, and then we can pop over to Natalie?
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for the talk today. This is great, and really appreciate everybody who put this together. I know these aren't easy to do. So, I mean, one thing I've seen is that there's a lot of constraint in organizations that's really built around the operating models functioning with how the capital structure and the cash flow and the industry financials work. So you wind up being somewhat held hostage to some degree by a lot of those mechanics, and you wind up having, sort of change of various sorts, sort of operating very peripherally, and you can sort of, areas that are sort of have developed naturally to have more change, whether it's in IT or digital programs, maybe parts of marketing, et cetera, they'll embrace it. But as you get closer and closer to the core of the operating model, so much of the financial structure is sort of, that's sort of the intersection. And so when you want to start to really implement something that is of magnitude, it runs up against, in essence, the financial imperatives, and the survival methodology of that company or that industry. What have you seen? And I know there's some industries like financials that sort of have certain flexibility built into them that's a little different. They've sort of been able to engineer a lot of their, as my friends call it, regulatory capital. But in other industries, you don't have that kind of regulatory capital. If anything, you have you already have, a barrier from the first time you show up. And so I'm just wondering, for those of us that are in those environments, we do a lot of this change around the operating model, but when you get closer to the core of the operating model, what approaches do you take besides the sort of blow it all up? And nobody's signing up for that in any substantial way.
Yeah, and they look at us like we're the ones who want to take risks, don't they? Like, no, we're not the ones who ask for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and then come back to you in 2 years to tell you how it's gone, right? So yeah, I think, again, it probably comes back to what we were talking about back to the business model and having more sane conversations in the boardroom. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I mean, having sat in boardrooms, it's like in some of them, it's all out war, right? They've fought really hard to get to where they are, and they'll fight their corner for their stuff. But from a financial perspective, we have a very compelling story, I believe, because we have, instead of the old way where we go and ask for a load of money and then Caesar gives us a thumbs up, the thumbs down, we've got actually a much more transparent way of operating where we're going to try things. And if they don't work, we're going to tell you. One of the CEOs I worked with said to me, James, he said, there's lots of things that keep me awake at night as a CEO. He said, people think I run the company. He says, I'm in charge of nothing. The VPs run the company, right? He said, I have the nuclear option of firing someone. But he says, the one thing that doesn't keep me awake at night is the work the Agile folks are doing. Because he says, I know that there's a problem. They're going to tell us. And I think that really, that's at the cusp of it. That's what we're talking about with business agility. You know, if we want to persuade, we can scare the bejesus out of them with VUCA, can't we? And how much of the world's changing. Still seeing clients who've got 3-year plans that didn't change last year, by the way. Unbelievable how rigid humans can get about and fixated on things they've promised to do. But really, we've got to, if you're a financial person, we've got a compelling story. Lean and Lean Six Sigma are going to help your profitability. They're going to take the waste out and the problems within your processes. Big business agility is going to help with your risk taking. It's going to help you to dip your toes in and figure out whether you're on the right path. Do more of the things that work, less of the things which are not working. But so we have a compelling story, but humans are still humans. And yeah, I can see what you're saying, Aaron. It doesn't always resonate because they're in this Game of Thrones game that it's not wholly compatible with our new systems thinking way of
if you let me add one quick thing, you bring up a fantastic point of sort of and I don't think anyone covers this. You're the first one I've really ever heard talk about sort of this, the ascendancy of the VP, right? Where, you know, it's a part of us developing, I think, and this is not a bad thing, but taking hierarchy out and taking, let's say, as much cruelty out of the old operating model has now built, it's almost warlordism that's kicked into gear. And, you know, you're not going to fire them. You can't make them do something. Now what? You know, and so you get into these 2, 3, 4-year trench wars in a valley, you know, and you, at best you get to go home after 3 years and say, well, that was what we did. And so it's this very, very challenging environment with this VP warlordism, as I've sort of called it.
It is, but I think also I look at people like the corporate rebels. There is a new breed of company coming, and I say watch out to the organizations that haven't figured this out. Because I'm working with an international retailer at the moment. They think their competitors have got some kind of sixth sense, right? They're able to sense the market better than them. I'm like, no, they don't. And you've got more money than they do. They're small little companies, right? You've got the resources to become amazing at this, but you're going to have to get away from this 3-year roadmap hang up that you've got. You're going to have to get used to experimenting and being wrong and creating a culture where it is okay to be wrong. And we are starting to see some leaders who are getting this as well. Of other people seeing this, it's not quite in the boardroom, but the rung below, seeing a lot more people who get this stuff and get the opportunity.
Yeah, a friend of mine puts this interesting way. He's an artist or a professional. Like, if you're into art, you probably know him. He says, look, if big worked, museums would have fantastic art that they created. And it's a great way to think about that the constraint of the individual artist or the artist collective is what generates art 90+% of the time, art schools, et cetera. And the museums are there as these, you know, warehouses basically of it, and a display platform for us in the regular world. So it's a really interesting way to think about that in terms of competitors, you know.
I think a lot of people need to realize as well that Agile is not there to solve all their problems. It's actually going to highlight all the problems.
Great.
Right? That's the big fundamental change here. It's not something where, the little black book's going to come out and all of a sudden, ta-da, everything's suddenly magically working. It's only going to highlight the things that are wrong with the current ways of working, the current systemic challenges, and you now need to come together as an organization to work through how you're going to fix it. And it's a bit like, as our good mate, obviously, whoever it is always turns around and says, it's like imparting common sense. It is just like, to be paid to impart common sense, and that's what it is at the end of the day. But you got to really think, and the number of CEOs and senior leaders who I talk to who think somehow Agile or Lean or some other system thinking is going to solve all their problems. Failure 101. Walk away, because it isn't. It's going to just highlight all of the problems and the challenges that we now need to come together to solve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Guys, we're getting close to time now, so I want to start wrapping it up. Natalie, I think that we've probably answered your question through the course of the ongoing discussion. And David, I'm hoping that I responded okay. Okay. And then David, please, if you want, just also reach out to James or Giles directly as well for any other thoughts on that. But yeah, changing that mindset to being agile versus doing, welcome to the party, man. It's a journey. It's sometimes a long journey, but you'll get there. So listen, James, thank you for sharing your insights over the course of your career with us, for connecting the dots between our various tribes and methodologies and tools, focusing on big pictures and visions and achieving outcomes. This has been a thoroughly enjoyable, insightful, and fun evening where it almost didn't even feel like we were learning. The conversation was amazing. We had a lot of positive feedback in the chat as well, and some really great links shared. So please do remember, if you want to export the chat, and then you'll be able to save and reference the links as reference. So before we close, I'd like to hand over to my wonderful co-host, Giles, to talk.
Okay, well,
what's upcoming.
Ash, thank you very much. Thank you for obviously looking after everybody today, allowing me to take a bit of a back seat. And James, awesome. Thank you. Ever since Neil put us in touch way back when, it's been on the cards to get you to come along to talk to the group. And I'm really glad you did. You smashed it. So thank you. And created such engaging conversation, which is what I've really enjoyed and appreciated about today's talk. So thank you.
Can I just say a huge thank you to you guys? We've been talking about tribes today. I feel like I found mine here. It's been awesome. I definitely want to come again.
Brilliant. Well, look, you're part of it, right? And we've got so many amazing people who keep coming back to these events to learn, just like I come back to learn and listen, as Ash does as well. The number of times I've seen so many of the similar names and faces here coming back over and over again, just to learn from people like yourself, James, and to, get an awareness and an appreciation. So, as ever, thank you very much. And with that being said, as we wrap up, we do have some more stuff, planned ahead. The ALM is driving ahead. I think we're now the 4th busiest Agile group in the area, and just in terms of getting things planned and sharing new things with the community. We've got Craig Coburn coming up next on the 1st of June, doing Visualize Your Agile Strategy and See Your Roadmaps in Context. So I am looking forward to that. Then what we've got is on June the 15th, one of our amazing open mic nights. And we had one of these back in March, I think it was, Ash, and Ash can keep me honest, where we literally just open it up to the audience to ask the questions. Ash and myself sat there facilitating, running some of the questions and things in the chat, but people just come along to ask whatever is on their mind, whatever's on their chest, the thing they want solved, right? And with everybody here, the thought leaders who you've seen today are a lot of coaches and other things, using James's Menti as a guide, as a rule of thumb. What we've got here are the right people to actually provide the answers. So we're going to have our amazing second open mic night. We're going to do an open mic night once a quarter, because we just had such an amazing event where so many people asked so many great questions and had so many great answers. And the diversification and the inclusivity of those questions as well was just insane and mind-blowing. Then we actually have July the 20th, we have Mike Burrows. And so he's coming along, leading and transforming with outcomes. So amazing to have Mike from Agenda Shift. He's going to be here coming along and talking to everybody as well. And so, look, it's all on there. It's all up on the Agility Leadership Network. We've got obviously the LinkedIn group as well, where all of these things get announced. So if you're not members, please feel free. The links are all in the meetup as well to go along and join. And that's it. Just be part of the community and what we're trying to create here in a great, awesome gang of people who just want to learn and grow like the rest of us. So major appreciation, James. Major appreciation to our community and our cohort who came here today. Thank you very much for coming along. Ash, thank you as ever for running an amazing event. And look forward to seeing everybody in a few weeks at the next event. See you all soon, guys. Thanks very much for coming.
Giles, thanks, James.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.